Hey everyone, and welcome to this discussion on Detroit horror. This is a super interesting topic, and I'm really excited to get into it. I'm going to be talking about two horror films set in Detroit. First, Barbarian, directed by Zach Cregger from 2022, and second, Don't Breathe, directed by Fede Alvarez, which came out all the way back in 2016. Don't Breathe also is a sequel from 2021, but I'm not going to talk about it. I haven't seen it, but I haven't seen or heard great things about it. So for the sake of this essay, it just doesn't exist. I first want to talk about Detroit and the intricacies of Detroit's geographical location. Detroit is in southern Michigan, a widely known Midwest city, the Motor City, if you will. But Detroit is part of an area called the Rust Belt. I had the pleasure of learning all about the Rust Belt and Rust Belt films this past couple of months in an incredible film and society class, so I may or may not know a little bit about this. I've also lived in the Rust Belt my whole life, and I've watched a lot of movies, so I feel like that gives me a bit of room to discuss this stuff. Now I want to make sure we all know what the Rust Belt is. The term was created in 1984 by this guy, Walter Mondale. He was referring to Ronald Reagan's trade ideologies during a campaign speech when he said, "Reagan's ideologies are turning the Midwest into a Rust Bowl." The press turned Rust Bowl into Rust Belt, and it's kind of been around ever since. The term's more historical than geographical because the areas included in the Rust Belt change depending on who you ask, but generally, the Rust Belt is this area of the United States. We've got Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and parts of Illinois, Wisconsin, and New York. The Rust Belt became rusty when manufacturing jobs in this part of the country moved south or overseas. A lot of people blame that on NAFTA, signed by Clinton in 1994. It's a term that those in the Midwest love to hate, but it's lasted the test of time so far, and it may never go away. Anne Trubeck argues it shouldn't go away. She says it's a phrase born of loss, but now that it has acquired texture, depth, and decades worth of meaning, it would be a loss to lose it. Detroit's struggle with the auto industry has roots all the way back to 1933, when FDR established the National Industrial Recovery Act that led to the development of the United Auto Workers Union in 1935, which has a troubled history with Detroit, as we all know, considering the fact that the UAW was on strike just this year. Auto companies had to pay their union workers higher, fairer wages or risk strike, driving up the price of cars, declining the auto industry in Detroit as early as the 1960s. Detroit was everywhere in the media throughout the 2000s, with the auto industry bailout during the Great Recession, causing auto sales to decrease by 40% and the loss of over 400,000 jobs. GM and Chrysler were on the brink of collapse, but were bailed out by the Bush administration with short-term loans. Despite the bailout, Detroit was grappling with decades of population loss, poverty, crime, and unemployment, and filed for bankruptcy in 2013. Detroit had a home in the forefront of popular culture because of this decades-long struggle, and we saw an increase in the amount of films and television shows that were set there. Not surprisingly, most of these films didn't paint Detroit in the best light. I mean, people had been hearing about Detroit's problem for decades, and the city was literally falling apart, making it the perfect place for horror and crime films. Blue Collar, RoboCop, 8 Mile, Only Lovers Left Alive, It Follows, are all iconic movies about Detroit. Now, whether these movies set in Detroit are actually filmed there is a whole other thing. We'll talk about it later, don't worry. For the sake of this essay, I'm only going to be talking about these two. Now, I want to preface by saying that I have seen both of these movies before and thought they were fine, but upon my rewatch in preparation for this essay, I was really focusing on the cinematography and editing and narrative. I enjoyed them so much more the second time. We'll start with Don't Breathe for chronology's sake. This movie is visually stunning, thanks to Pedro Luque, the chief of cinematography for the film. This film was his breakout project and was well received and applauded, specifically for its cinematic techniques. The writing and directing and producing for this film was all done by Fede Alvarez. He made a few short films in the early 2000s, was approached by Ghost House Films to direct and co-write the Evil Dead remake in 2013, and then went on to make Don't Breathe. The guy's kind of a jack of all trades, if you will. I don't want to spend too much time talking about the plot, but generally it's about a trio of Detroit youth that make a living by pawning goods that they steal from people's houses during robberies. We follow them as they break into a blind man's house searching for a large sum of money that he supposedly has stashed from a lawsuit settlement. The blind man catches them. It turns out that the death of his daughter has driven him into an insane pursuit of revenge. There are jump scares, gore, plot twists, everything that makes a good horror movie. The story of the characters in this film make a lot of sense when you think of the plight of the Rust Belt as it's represented in other Rust Belt films. The Rust Belt is a place where people are either born there and die there, or they fight like hell to get out and never come back. We don't know a lot about Alex and Money, played by Dylan Minnette and Daniel Zavato respectively, but we do get some background information on Rocky, played by Jane Levy. The whole reason she commits to this robbery is to get enough money to get her and her younger sister out of Detroit and away from their alcoholic mother. Over and over again throughout the movie, it looks as if she's going to be able to escape with a fortune tucked safely into her backpack, take her sister, and get out. And over again, the fantasy gets ripped away from her. There's one final lock keeping them inside, they finally get it open, and bam, there's the blind man. They finally make it upstairs and bam, there's the dog. She makes it into the vent. The dog somehow manages to follow her. She manages to trap the dog in the car and bam, the blind man is back again. I think it speaks a lot to people that grow up in the Rust Belt, especially in situations like Rocky's. She's essentially been forced to become a mother to her sister because it's obvious that their real mom is doing a terrible job. Her relationship with her sister shows us that she has a moral compass, and it makes me think that Rocky resorts to stealing out of desperation and lack of an alternative, although it's unclear how old she is, what kind of education she's gotten, whether she's tried to get money from actually working for it, etc. She's forced to use the little money that she does make, however unethically, to feed her family. It's like she's always playing catch up. And when she finally manages to get away from the blind man and is about to get away from the city with her sister, it's revealed that the blind man lived, is being painted as a victim, and is the one person that has the opportunity to ruin Rocky's entire escape and undo all of the hardships that she endured to get her and her sister out. However, it's revealed that he didn't report the money stolen. I assume out of an understanding that if Rocky were to get caught with his money, she'd take him down right along with her. Other Rust Belt elements in the film beyond Rocky's storyline are present in some of the more technical aspects of the film. As I mentioned before, this movie is so pleasing to look at. The way the camera moves through the space is so satisfying, but the film is also packed full of establishing shots of the city, exposing the rugged, dirty, abandoned, and overgrown parts of it. The blind man's house in the film is a real house on Buena Vista Street in Detroit. Alvarez said that they picked that house because it was the only nice house on the street, surrounded by a bunch of abandoned homes. The house is alone, the blind man is the only real civilization there. The story had to happen there. They filmed all of the outdoor scenes on location in Detroit, and the scenes inside the house were filmed at Stern Film Studio in Hungary. And just because I love how this film looks, here's some of my favorite shots, including the coolest credit scene that I think I've ever seen. Now I want to move on to Barbarian. This film is directed by Zach Kreger, who got his start as part of a comedy group, The Whitest Kids You Know. He co-directed 2 comedy films with Trevor Moore before making his solo directorial debut with Barbarian. Again, I don't want to get too invested in the plot here, but Tess, played by Georgina Campbell, goes to Detroit for a job interview and she books an Airbnb for her stay. When she arrives, she realizes that another man, Keith, played by Bill Skarsgård, is already staying there, meaning that the place was double booked. The two agree to share the place, get to know each other, as romance may or may not be blooming. Right at the most intense part of the movie so far, where the monster is bashing Keith's head in, we switch to a different place, character, storyline, everything. We meet AJ, played by Justin Long, who is accused of raping a co-star. He returns to Detroit to sell some assets as his legal costs ramp up, where it's revealed that he is the owner of the Airbnb. He too finds the secret room, runs into the thing in the basement, and becomes trapped, along with Tess. There are a few reasons why I think the film is very quote-unquote rusty. There's a lot in the storylines of the characters that I think fits the Rust Belt tropes that I learned from my class on this topic. Again, there's the idea of wanting to get out or advance in society, as Tess is looking for a job as a researcher for a Catherine Jones film about Detroit music. It's interesting that the music scene of Detroit made it into this film. Barry Gordon, a Detroit native, founded Motown Records in the heart of Detroit. I recall specifically talking about the White Stripes on more than one occasion in class. So, a film about Detroit music is rusty for sure. The film also has a lot to say about captivity. Like I said, a lot of people are born and die here, and if not, they fight like hell to get out. The house almost seems to suck people into its orbit, like it's a black hole or has its own gravity. Once Tess and Keith enter the underground tunnels, it's almost impossible for them to get out. Keith dies before he gets the chance to really try and escape, and things are looking pretty bleak for Tess and AJ too. The mother, credited as being played by Matthew Patrick Davis, doesn't appear to be someone that's ever been a part of society. The house acts as an accomplice to her. Her gravity is what keeps Tess and AJ for so long, and the house is just a vessel for all of it to occur. It's like being afraid of the dark. It's not the darkness that's scary, it's the idea of not being alone in the darkness. Likewise, the house isn't scary. The hidden rooms and dark tunnels aren't scary. The fear comes from why they might be there, what could have made them, and what happens inside of them. I want to dive a bit more into the mother, but first we need to talk about this guy. Frank is another character that we meet right at a really intense moment in the story. Right as Tess and AJ converge in the pit, we switch to Frank's storyline, and we see a Detroit at the beginning of its change in the 1980s. We see the house in a completely different time. It's one of many nice houses on the block. The neighborhood is bustling with activity. We even hear a used car commercial on the radio. But we quickly learn that the shining, bustling facade of Detroit is harboring a psychopath. Frank is an all-around terrible guy. He has a woman held captive in his home, and it's revealed that he has children with these women, children with those children, and so on and so forth, which is what the mother was born out of. Now with that context, we can talk about her. Her whole shtick is that she wants to be a mother. Anyone that enters the tunnel is adopted by her as one of her children. When they disobey, she punishes them, i.e. Keith's death, and she feeds them when they need to be consoled. She learned well from those creepy nursing videos. When we don't know who or what the mother is or where she came from, she's scary and gross. But when we learn what she was born out of, it really isn't her fault, and I don't think she can be held accountable for what goes on in those tunnels. I actually empathize with her and would argue that she's the real victim, and if anything, she has good intentions and just doesn't know any better. Like I said, she punishes when they disobey, feeds when they need consoled, but she also protects Tess, like with her life. When AJ and Tess are on the water tower after making their escape, AJ throws Tess over the side, leaving her plummeting to her death. But the mother leaps off the tower after her. She breaks Tess's fall and saves her life. And when AJ, the other real villain of this movie, let's be honest, is gaslighting her and saving face, she rips his head in half to protect her baby. Then, naturally, it's time for her to take her baby home, to which Tess says she can't go back, and heartbreakingly has to shoot the mother in the head. It's a heartbreaking and emotional ending. I was devastated. There's an interesting connection between the mother and the Rust Belt in kind of an unexpected maternal way. There are a ton of documentaries, some that I've watched, about the rehabilitation of Rust Belt cities, encouraging small business owners, artists, young professionals, families to get back to the city. We see government officials and longtime residents of these cities talking about how much they love the city and the faith they have that people will fall in love with the city again. I think while the intentions are good, the execution might not be there. It's hard to see people living comfortably with good jobs and high salaries, trying to emphasize with the hardships of Rust Belt residents. They don't experience the grit and grind of living in the Rust Belt the same way that regular working class people do. The mother, in a similar way, has good intentions for her babies, but it isn't right. She just doesn't and can't understand why they'd want to leave, which is, in a weird way, similar to the folks in these documentaries that can't understand why no one wants to come back. Some other Rust Belt themes are present in the technical aspects too. Firstly, the setting is Brightmoor, a suburb of northwest Detroit. Brightmoor experiences high crime rates and heavy population decline, and when Catherine finds out that Tess is staying there, she urges her, practically begs her, to get out. Now remember way back at the beginning when I said we'd be discussing the actual filming locations of movies set in Detroit? Well, here we go. The house and street that this takes place are not in Detroit. They aren't even real houses. They built the houses and the other ruins on the street on a soundstage in Sofia, Bulgaria. The only scenes of actual Detroit in the film are beyond the house's block. Of the other films I listed at the beginning, RoboCop's another that's set in Detroit but filmed elsewhere. Which is funny because Detroit has a statue of RoboCop that will come out of storage to be installed in the city sometime next year. Just an ironic fun fact. Now I want to take a quick look at the villains in both of these films together because I can't help but see some similarities. We've got the blind man and Frank. Now, each of these men are white and the only ones left in their respective blocks or neighborhoods, which is interesting considering Detroit's population is overwhelmingly African American, and most of the crime in Detroit is perpetuated by black males. In recent years, the rates of black people moving out of Detroit has also been increasing, which makes it even more odd that the blind man and Frank seemed to have no intentions of leaving. Just a side note, it's kind of poetic that Frank is only able to die when someone gives him the opportunity. He was the captor for a long time, as we learned from all of those tapes, but at some point he became captive by his own inability to leave his bed. He would have had to wait to die if it weren't for AJ bringing Frank's means to an end within his reach. Speaking of AJ, he's another villain, even though he is also victimized by the mother, and he's a bit more of a stereotypical villain. He doesn't belong in Detroit, he's out of touch, essentially exploiting his property there to make money for himself on the side. When he returns, his own naivety and tendencies to only look out for himself cause him to die. And he's also the type of person that thinks he's God's gift to the earth and will absolutely not admit that he is a bad person. He'll lie and gaslight his way out of anything if he sees an opportunity. Like I said, I really enjoyed both of these films as I was able to really look at them closely, and this whole project was so fun to make. Much harder than I originally anticipated, but nonetheless, I had a blast. I've never done anything quite like this, so I really hope it was worth your time. Happy Finals Week to all who celebrate, and thank you so much for watching.